Now, you all know that, I am passionate about Judaism. I'm passionate about being Jewish. I'm passionate about religion. I'm passionate about a lot of topics. I'm passionate about studying history, world history. I'm passionate about politics to some extent. I'm passionate about world history generally as well, not just Israel's history. I'm passionate about sociology, about anthropology, all of those things. But the thing or the person I'm most passionate about is Jesus. I believe Jesus to be the Messiah of Israel. And it costs me a great deal of time to have that position. If you follow me at all on Quora, you'd know. I take a substantial amount of abuse from within the non-Messianic Jewish community for that, for my love of Jesus and my belief in who he is. And I'm not sorry 1 minute for doing it, because I do believe he is the Messiah, firstly for Israel and then for the world. And that is my favorite topic to talk about, even with all these other very interesting things around. I don't want to make people amazed by the supernatural. I don't want people to find Judaism to be the thing that's what they should be knowing at the cost of everything else. Everything in my heart and mind, my purpose, my mission, I believe the reason for my existence as a Jew even, is to acknowledge and lift up and make famous Jesus as the Messiah, not only of Israel, but as the world, of the world too. So please always know that with me, even if we're getting into these strange other topics, that's always the goal. So I look for opportunities to turn the story towards the topic of Jesus. So that's what I'm about to do now. Um, so you should be seeing on the screen now my strange gospel cover for the book, and then an extract. I've just chosen one from a few that I did have last week. And I'll read it, and then I'll give the backstory to it and just give a simple summary. Again, if you've got the book, you could be reading it for yourself. I haven't put page reference. I don't think that's all that necessary, because you can just go and you'd end up reading the book and find this. So this is from the book. So here in Matthew 16, Jesus is standing at a location which is the geographical symbol of the origins of the kingdom of darkness. Jesus stands at the proverbial metaphorical doorway of the powers of darkness. Um, Anyone want to just give us an overview of what's happening in Matthew 16? What am I referring to here? It's a famous situation, of course. What is happening in Matthew 16? You can look it up if you don't have it offhand.
The Pharisees and Sadducees demand a sign from heaven.
Kathy, if you look into it, what do you find?
Jesus replied, no sign would be given that evil and faithless generation except the sign of Jonah.
Any other, in that entire chapter, is there anything else that jumps out at you? It's something significant and
There's Peter's confession, and there's Christ foretells his death, resurrection, and second coming.
okay, take us to Peter's confession there, Kathy. Give us the background there, because that's what I wanted you to find.
Okay. Well, now when Jesus came into the district of Caesarea, he asked his disciples, who do men say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, you are Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the powers of death shall not prevail against it.
Okay,
I will
there
give
we
you the
go.
keys.
That's
Yeah.
it. Thanks, Kathy. So quite a lot there, and it's first thing to note: who is famous in the Tanakh in noting that term, the Son of Man? Who uses that term in the Tanakh? Nobody know.
Isn't it Ezekiel? I think
Daniel.
my mother was right. She said Daniel. I said Ezekiel.
Daniel would be the most famous person to use that term. And here's why it's important. Remember, I said we can spend a lot of time showing you all the literature from the intertestamental period. So, literally, what this means is the period that just precedes Jesus coming on the scene. The most work about the supernatural in Judaism is penned during that time. So, as I think I've said before in one of the sessions, it's no coincidence that at the height of supernatural awareness in Israel and in the exiled space, at the height of that, God chooses to have his son be born. I mean, you can't overlook that, right? Can you see that there's something up with that? It's like God saying this peak, I believe his spirit just inspires all of that writing, all of that contemplation. And then at the height of that, while everyone is thinking about it, he brings into time and space the epitome of what that concept is going to be. And so you've got to know as well, documents and writings like Daniel's were incredibly important, even in the first century when Jesus is around. Remember, Daniel predicts Hanukkah as well. And as if you've listened to the Hanukkah series that we've got on YouTube now too, you would have gained a better appreciation for the depth of the effect of Hanukkah that carries for generations literally into the time of Jesus. So even in the time of Jesus, the story of Hanukkah hasn't died down yet. The effects of Hanukkah hadn't died down yet. And when you ignore all of these things, ultimately what's the saddest part of all, you will do Jesus in. Even if you love him, you're going to do him in if you're not learning this stuff. The good news is this, you don't have to feel bad because that's why you're learning. That's why they are gifted, and I'm hoping you consider me gifted, teachers given, and I'm going to quote on that too, gifts given to the church. Remember, I've said this now, it's going to make sense with something I'm going to say later, to help show this. And remember, the onus is always on you. Kathy loves this. I know Kathy appreciates this. Kathy will tell you that I always tell you to challenge me. I always tell you to check if I'm telling the truth. So you don't have to worry about being duped or lied to, because you can go check and you're allowed to ask me questions. So I'm not expecting blind, devotion and acceptance. So you can see now why I've chosen this piece out of Matthew 16. The place Jesus stands, as I say, the geographical symbols of the origin of the kingdom of darkness. Jesus stands at the place where Baal was worshipped. This is like literally some translations will say the gates of hell will not prevail. And my brother and I stood there in Israel. We literally stood on the place that definitively the area where Jesus would have stood. He would have been in that space, walking distance space, when he made that declaration and that challenge. It's really a challenge, the gates of hell. We look down into what they call the gates of hell. It's a huge cavity that goes into under Mount Hermon, effectively, which if you've been learning about should make you go, oh my word, what? He stood and said it there? Yes, he did. Now, I'm trying to think who it was that said this. I can't remember which scholar said this, but they pointed out, and it's very good to point this out, that they said that in terms of warfare, gates are not offensive weapons. What are gates in terms of when you're under attack? What do your gates do? Think in terms of warfare. What would you use gates for?
To keep the enemy out or
There we go.
protection.
There we go. Kathy, gates are defensive mechanisms, right?
Yeah.
So doesn't it give a new spin on your Jesus, Kathy, that he goes up to the gates of hell? Now remember, please don't think hell in Christian terms, Satan with his pitchfork and all of that. That's completely wrong. Just consider it as a place of a hotspot for demonic and satanic activity, a link to the underworld, literally, because that's what it was. And Jesus walks into that space, makes a declaration about himself, and then even says what effectively? Basically, he says, I'm telling you guys that what I'm about to start, not even the powers of darkness, strongholds, their gates are going to keep me out and you out from us plundering them. Any of you ever heard a pastor tell it to you that way?
No.
If someone was going to say yes, I was going to say, please send me their number. I want to congratulate them and thank them. Now tell me which Jesus sounds more powerful to you. The Christian Jesus who's standing there is effectively saying, oh, they're going to beat on me and they're going to hurt me, but we'll prevail. We're going to cower and we're going to, but we'll prevail. They're going to beat on us, but we can't, we'll just keep on going. Which Jesus sounds more powerful, that one or the one that I'm telling you is saying, I'm coming into your territory, powers of darkness, and I'm going to disarm you. Option A, the Christian Jesus. Option B, the Jewish Jesus. Someone please tell me which Jesus sounds to you to be more powerful.
Option B.
It should be, yeah. That's logical. And again, the important thing is to notice those are definitively two different Jesuses for a number of reasons. And the spiritual warfare, the history of Judaism's approach to spiritual warfare, with the documents I've already mentioned, with accepting the pagan histories that have influenced Israel's development and God's instruction for Israel to aggressively wipe out demonic powers and Nephilim and angel hybrid races as they moved through towards Canaan. Obviously, what they found in Canaan, what they to wipe out too. You're talking about two different gods and two different Jesus. I'm sure you can see that. One of them is quite aggressive, in fact, against spiritual powers of darkness, and the other one's quite passive. So here's what I'm thinking. Christianity has created a gentle Jesus, and Judaism has the more aggressive warrior Jesus. But let's see. Look, let's go more into this, and then you tell me what you think. So as I said, what ends up happening in Deuteronomy 32 is that the nations are subject to lesser Elohim. If you look on the picture I've shown you, look dead center and you drop your eyes to the bottom, you might see two characters standing on a rock, and one of them is clearly holding his hands up. So this would be a depiction, obviously, of one of these gods. And this is how they're seen. They are seen this way. They are seen as, and they worshipped, of course, and they accept the worship. And they look intimidating, and to human beings, they would be intimidating. I think I want to remind you and keep in mind that these are sons of God, right? These are sons of God. These Elohim are sons of God. In fact, that means that God loved them. And I think that's vitally important to note. I think you get, again, the Christian assumption is angels are just these, emotionless, thoughtless, caricatures, these stick figures that just get used occasionally in the Bible, like they're just there to, get some stuff done. That again is a problematic logic. And if you have that logic, you actually undermine Jesus. And I'll explain that, why I say that in a little while. Now, I've already told you, Jesus aggressively walks into the enemy zone. So spiritual warfare, like just it's happening. It's there in your Gospels in more ways than you realized it was. And again, if you read Strange Gospel, you're going to see it. I spell it out quite clearly there, so it wouldn't be difficult to notice. So I'm suggesting to you that Jesus moves into the enemy zone. Now, what do I mean with the enemy zone? I don't mean just generally. I mean quite specifically on earth. If the nations were divided up according to these beings, which they were, then these beings were given territorial, geographical authority. And that's what we spoke about last week with the cosmic geography. Now, just something to note, I did get cut off early last week. And part of what we're putting in here now, literally this part I'm going to put in now, was going to be the concluding part of last week. So it's not attached to last week's session, but it's attached to this week's session. So you're not missing it out in any case. And what I'm about to go into, and I think you're going to find this interesting. Um, I don't know if you people should know this. You probably should know this to some extent. Generally, in Judaism, from the intertestamental period, the location for the demons. Now, let's recall what demons are. Demons are considered to be the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. The Nephilim would be those first generation of beings born between the union of the celestial rebels that came down, the watchers that sinned the way they did, and human women. So they give birth to Nephilim. And then when the Nephilim die, the Nephilim's spirits are restless. And this is what's interesting. I think I said this last week. What's interesting is that the mythology of ghosts is actually quite accurate to some extent. We always consider ghosts to be restless spirits, and they can't go. They stuck between two different realms. That's all true, not of people who have died, right? This is where the lie comes in. That concept is actually from paganism, because it's the Nephilim spirit, God, as part of the judgment on their parents, on the watchers themselves, and on the Nephilim who were so evil. The judgment is that they don't get to rest. They don't go down to Sheol to rest and wait for the day of resurrection or judgment. They don't get to come up to God, because spirit belongs with God. So effectively, spirit has to return to God. So they don't get that. They're stuck in the middle. So that's what shows you how and then these demons and these principalities and powers have just sowed lies into cultures around the world. And I think it was last week, Nandi, that we spoke about, or the week before, we touched on the African culture idea of ancestors. Um, that's one of the biggest and most powerful and even successful lies, not only in the African culture. The same concept is actually still done in other cultures as well around the world. So it's not even unique just to Black African cultures, as one would expect, because obviously, as we know, these watcher gods were put over multiple nations. So the lie of the ghost thing has truth to it, because it's actually the story of the Nephilim. The Nephilim's spirits that can't rest anywhere, which is an important thing. But the other thing I wanted to note to you, where is the primary place these demons end up inhabiting? And the clue is on the screen. Wilderness. In Judaism, the wilderness became the abode of these demonic spirits, effectively. So it's like no man's land. The sun's beating down, there's nowhere to hide. The sandstorms, it's just uninhabitable. It's not a great place to be. So it became the place. And if you read prophecies in the Old Testament, in Tanakh, when you read prophecies, you find the same, that it is the designated location. Now, isn't it interesting that spiritual warfare is linked to the wilderness or desert area, however you want to call it? I spoke a little bit last week about Azazel. So it's in the video from last week that he ends up being in the desert. And on Yom Kippur, what did the priest have to do? The goat for the Lord and the goat for Azazel. And the goat for Azazel was sent into the desert carrying the sins away. And the hope was that it would fall off a mountain or off a steep cliff and fall and kill itself on the jagged rocks at the bottom, which is ironic, since Azazel is said to have been chained up in an area in the desert like that, to be held on, to be filled with jagged rocks as well. So this is Judaism's spiritual warfare. And the crazy part is this stuff is in the Tanakh, and it's in the story of Jesus. Jesus is effectively considered to be Azazel in one instance, in the one synagogue where he declares it's the Jubilee, and he's not well received by some of the men of the town, because they say, but we know this guy, he's blaspheming now, he can't be. Their insistence or their desire to throw him off a cliff shouldn't be coincidence to you. He does this on the day of Yom Kippur. And on Yom Kippur, Jews know that the goat for Azazel is supposed to be thrown off a cliff. That is what they were claiming Jesus is, the goat for Azazel. Now, again, if you're a Christian and you don't follow Judaism and understand, you're going to miss that. Obviously, they don't get to throw him off the cliff, which in fact is a witness testimony that he's the other goat, which is a beautiful picture. Both goats effectively, in a way, become a sacrifice, although we won't say that Azazel goat is a sacrifice. in the normal sense. But if Jesus proves himself not to be Azazel in that story and the way the Gospels portray it, automatically the writers are implying he is the goat for the Lord, which then makes him the positive sacrifice. And Jesus' life depicts that. Keep that in mind. Just a few things, though, to tell you about the wilderness. Domain of the demons and the dead. I'm not getting too much into that. Just told you about Azazel and Yom Kippur. Other important note, Jesus becomes an Israel. He is Israel, of course, but he becomes a picture of Israel. How long was Israel in the wilderness? You can tell us quickly.
40 years?
That's right. And how long was Jesus tempted in the wilderness?
40 days.
Is that not interesting? The implication is obvious. The picture it's supposed to paint is obvious. Jesus is Israel. Israel and Jesus were both first baptized. Israel goes through the Red Sea. Jesus gets baptized and then led into the desert. So there's that obvious picture. You know, in the last few weeks, I've been talking about the importance of cosmic mountains, holy mountains, what they represent. The Satan, not Lucifer, the Satan, whoever that happened to be in that instance, takes Jesus to a mountain and offers him and says, hey, look, I've got all of this. So what is it that the Satan, the adversary in that case, whichever high-ranking prince it was, says, look, I'm offering you these kingdoms. Which kingdoms are those? Those are the kingdoms from Deuteronomy 32. I hope the pieces are like dropping into place when you put this together, because that's the goal of what I'm trying to go for here. I love this quote from Paul, who was clearly a supernaturalist, a Kabbalist that was into the mystics, but on the right side of it. Okay, so Paul was a mystic, but he knew how to handle it. Now, the promises were made to Abram and his offspring. It does not say, and his offsprings, referring to many, but referring to one, and your offspring, who is Christ. So Paul's effectively saying, now you probably can't appreciate this if, again, like I say, you don't have a thorough understanding of Essene theology, eschatology, of all the pseudo-epigrapha of Enoch and Jubilees, and yeah, it's just there is a plethora of works on this, and Paul is taking all of that. He knows all of this stuff, and he's just turning it into this new story, putting all the pieces together and making Jesus the focal point of it, which I think is absolutely phenomenal. Mark 5 verse 7, one of my favorite scriptures, and I'll tell you why now. And crying out with a loud voice, he said, what have you to do with me, Jesus, the Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me. This would be one of the cases where Jesus encounters a man that's demon possessed, and the demons speak out. And check what they call him, Son of the Most High God. That's not in the random statement. That implies that they understand this guy who's, and get this, Jesus wanders into Gentile territory. The man is acting aggressively again. Spiritual warfare is happening. He's walking into Gentile territory and he's pretty much taunting them. They're getting nervous. They understand he has authority. The label they give him tells you they understand he has the authority. They know that he can torment them. I love that, and you should love it too. That's your Jesus. Okay, so how does Paul see Jesus? Just quick view. I'm not going deep into this because it will take too much time for you. Psalm 68:18. So first, I'm going to show you how Paul uses Psalm 68:13 in a second. You ascended on high, leading a host of captives in your train and receiving gifts among men, even among the rebellious, that the Lord God may dwell there. So this is a statement about God who is going to reverse the impact of Deuteronomy 32. He's going to reverse the stuff up of those fallen rebels, what they've done, their attempt to get worship and to undermine God. So the psalmist is basically saying, you, God, ascended on high. You led a host of captives. Who are the captives? It's those watchers. It's those rebellious beings who received worship that shouldn't. even among the rebellious, that you see. Beautiful psalm, right? You're about to see how Paul used it. In Ephesians 4, verse 8 to 10. When he ascended on high, he led a host of captives. Who's he talking about? Jesus. Yeah, he's taking God, the comment made about God, giving it to Jesus. Very radical move in the first century, of course. And he gave gifts to men. In saying he ascended, what does it mean but that he had also descended into the lower regions of the earth? He who was descended is the one who also ascended far above all the heavens that he might fill all things. Beautiful. Paul is taking that psalm. He's taking the rebellion of the watchers. He's taking the psalm that declares God to make a mockery of those watchers. And then he says, how about we put that on Jesus? Now Jesus becomes the one who, after dying and rising, leads the captives. Now, the captives in this case, again, would be those watchers that are chained in darkness, that were trying to, the original group, I'm going to say, firstly, is in view here, chained in darkness for their abominable sin of cohabiting with women, as they did, and then gave gifts to men. So he's taking what, so watch out, God receives gifts among men, and Jesus gives gifts to men. Now, remember I spoke something earlier. Who wants to take a stab? Again, you can even look in Ephesians 4 in this passage. What are those gifts that Paul then defines in his very creative use of that psalm?
Would they not be the gifts of the Spirit, as we know them to be?
Janet, you're very close. If you look at verse 11, you're going to go, if someone wants to read verse 11. So you're actually on point, Janet, but Paul just explains it way more creatively and more definitively. If someone wants to get Ephesians 4:11, you're going to see how Paul has masterfully actually taken Psalm 68 and molded it through Jesus.
And his gifts were that some should be apostles, some prophets, some evangelists, some pastors and teachers, to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building
Aha,
up the body of Christ.
there we go. Is anyone appreciating Ephesians 4 a little bit more right now? Because I hope so. I hope you're seeing it's based on Psalm 68, which is a cosmic gospel. It's the war story. And then Paul is saying, here's the update. Not undermining Psalm 68, that's still firmly in place. But now he's saying God has taken it to a new level. And his son, that son of the Most High, that the demons acknowledged as such, has now, and he's taking this thing that God was given gifts. Because here's what used to happen. When a king conquered a place, what did the people that he's conquered have to do? They had to basically kiss his backside. They had to butter him up. It's just what you did. It's part of the process. What Paul is saying, when Jesus did his part of the spiritual warfare, he didn't receive gifts, although he does at his birth. In this case, when he ascended, he gave gifts to man. So instead of receiving the gifts, he gives them to us. Isn't that beautiful? Can you see the theology that Paul is creating here? And then he's telling you, so here's the question. Apostles, pastors, teachers, evangelists, all of their work, doesn't it immediately tell you that their work is based on spiritual warfare then? And if it's based on this kind of cosmic spiritual warfare, shouldn't all of their work be like verbally acknowledging that in what they do? See, that's why I say if you've got a leader who really is a gift from God with God's endorsement, and that's what I hope I am. If I'm not, then God help me, because I will be in trouble, of course. And what am I literally doing? I'm teaching you the spiritual warfare aspects of this. I'm showing you who Jesus is, and I'm about to show you before we end now. I'm about to show you what your responsibility is in this. And that's where we're going with this.